Picture this. You've just come up with a brilliant design idea. It's clever, it's pithy, it speaks directly to your target audience. You're pretty chuffed with yourself, actually. And then you show it to your boss or your client, and they look at it for approximately 3.5 seconds before delivering those four soul destroying words. It's not on brand. And just like that, your idea is dead. Murdered in cold blood by a document entitled brand underscore guide underscore final underscore v2 2017.pdf. Ouch. And now you have to use the approved colors, the approved fonts, the approved everything. Even though all of those things now make your idea look about as exciting as a day out at the British Lawnmower Museum. Well, today I'm here to share something radical with you. Your brand guidelines are not the 10 commandments. They are merely a suggestion, a guide. The clue's in the name. And sometimes, just sometimes, the best thing you can do is completely ignore them. So let's talk about how and when we should do that. Now, before the brand police come knocking on my door, I am not saying brand guidelines are useless. They are very much not. They are very useful, especially when you've got a large company with loads of employees creating content and designs. You need that consistency, otherwise you end up with the visual continuity of a dropped kebab. They are, of course, a helpful reference tool, but some people treat them as sacred text that's been carved into stone and under no circumstances can they be deviated from. And if you treat them like that, that's when they stop becoming useful. So these guideline documents are typically created for a general audience. They're designed to work across the board for the widest possible range of scenarios. But what happens when you're not talking to the general audience? What happens when you're talking to a very specific group of people? A group of people who have their very own visual identity, like their own culture, their own expectations. That's when your guidelines can actually start working against you. And that's when you need to crumple them up, chuck them into the sea, set that specific section of the sea on fire, then throw the whole lot in the bin. So I'm going to give you 3 situations now where you have my full permission, if that means anything, to completely deviate from your brand guidelines. So situation 1 is when your audience speaks a different visual language than you. Let's imagine you work for the NHS. So you're all about trust, stability, and care. There's lots of blues, lots of sans serif fonts, and people looking way too happy about their recent diagnosis. Their visuals are supposed to convey trust, stability, and empathy. But now let's imagine you're working for the NHS and you have been tasked to come up with a campaign to target men. Men are, of course, the species of human who typically avoid going to the doctor at all costs to get any sort of minor ailment checked out. We are famously awful at that. That's when those neutral blues and somber images aren't going to convince them to do anything differently. We need memes and pop culture references in order to pay attention to anything. We're a simple folk. So in this instance, if you stick to the brand guidelines, yes, you will create something consistent and professional in inverted commas, but you will completely miss the mark at effectively communicating the message to your intended audience and getting them to change the behavior that you're trying to change. You're going to lose them before they've even read the headline. So in this scenario, we need to research their world, we need to research what they respond to, and we need to create something that mirrors their own visual language, even if, and especially if, it is different from your existing visual language. And this is a great example of how the NHS have tackled this in the past. They've taken film references and put a sort of a minor ailments spin on them, related to earache, itchy eyes, and sore throats. Situation 2 is when the guidelines make your message weaker. And sometimes the best way to communicate a message is to do the exact opposite of what your guidelines tell you to do. So most NHS messaging is around serious issues surrounding illness and mental health problems. And obviously that demands a certain seriousness, which the visuals should support. But let's say you're about to work on a campaign that has a more positive message. You're trying to encourage people to get out and about and move and keep fit. If your brand guidelines dictate that everything should be somber and understated and serious, that tone's not going to match this message about positivity and fitness and movement. It's going to feel at odds with what you're trying to say, and it's just not going to work. So that's when you break the rules, like they have done here. There's brighter colors, there's movement and joy in the imagery, And because the message is more important than the guidelines, they deviated from them. And situation 3 is when you need to stand out in a crowded market. If everyone in your industry is following the same design rules, then obviously you're all going to start looking the same. And when you all start looking the same, you all merge together into a mediocre sea of nothingness. Kind of like every single fucking AI company at the minute. They all look and sound exactly the same, like a sea of floating arseholes. So if you're working for a company in a similar situation, that is, you're blending in with everyone else rather than standing out in a meaningful way, then you need to start breaking out from some of those guideline rules. You might not be ready for a complete brand overhaul just yet, but you certainly need to start experimenting to give you some visual differentiation from the others. Because attention is the first step to conversion. Who said that? I did just a couple of seconds ago. Okay, let's look at how to break the rules strategically. All right, so you've decided to break the rules. Good for you. I like you. All right, but here you can't just throw a microwavable meal for two at the wall and hope that it sticks. You need to do this with a little bit of strategy involved. Let me show you a quick example. We'll use our little AI friends for this one. And let's look at motion specifically here. They're doing very well for themselves, obviously, so I'm not suggesting for a second that they need to change anything about their visuals, but let's imagine a scenario where they probably shouldn't concern themselves with sticking to the visual identity. Let's pretend we've been asked to create a campaign targeting serious fitness fanatics and gym goers. It's very unlikely that these people will resonate strongly with the typical AI aesthetic. Certainly not enough to stop them in their tracks anyway. They want something that feels strong and gritty and human and with a little bit rough around the edges. So in this instance, I'm going to break the rules. I'll start by researching my audience, finding out where they hang out online, see what products and services they use, and how those things are promoted to them. And this is the kind of aesthetic I'm seeing. Loads of bold typography, all textured and grainy, lots of dark backgrounds with only really one single pop of color, loads of black and white imagery on top of it. And these are the kind of visuals I'm going to try and emulate. Right, now let's see how we can apply what we've just learned. With my first idea, I'm going to bruise their ego a little bit, and I'm going to make it look all grainy and stuff. When your workflow is weak, you are too. Stop wasting time and start using motion. Let's try another one. I'm going to compare them to Greek gods for this next one and make it look all sort of rough and tough. Greek gods don't do admin, so why the hell are you? Ditch the desk time and download motion today. I'm going to do one more by creating a quick 3D model in Adobe Neo. I'm going to create a model of some barbells and a computer monitor, and I can use them to really hammer home our benefits with this line: automate the boring stuff, dominate the heavy stuff. Motion, maximize your productivity. So that's 3 examples of how we can move from the usual cohesive, approved look to something completely different, but different in a meaningful, useful way that's actually going to resonate with the people we're trying to talk to here. They're very unlikely to give a shit about this and way more likely to care about this. But before you go rogue and start redesigning absolutely everything, let me give you one important caveat. You still need to respect the core of your brand. Now, there are, of course, some things you shouldn't mess with. The logo, for example, should always remain consistent. The tone of voice, the brand's core values, the general feeling that you're trying to convey with everything that you put out should always remain the same. You're not trying to destroy everything you've built with this, obviously. You're trying to adapt it visually rather than with the whole values and the tone of voice and everything you stand for. Think of it like this. Your brand is a person, and those brand guidelines are their everyday attire. But sometimes that person's going to get invited to a fancy dress party and they're going to need to put on something completely different, completely out of character, so they work in the scenario they're going into. That's kind of the same thing we're doing here. We're dressing in a ridiculous fancy dress costume because we will be ostracized at the party if we don't. So remember the 3 situations in which you can take your guidelines and throw them in the bin. When your audience speaks a different visual language, when the guidelines make your message weaker, and when you need to stand out in a crowded market and your industry is full of very similar looking arseholes. Sometimes literally. And now that you understand that, I want you to check this video next, and I'm going to show you exactly how to create designs when you have no visual identity to work with whatsoever. Goodbye.